So the first thing that you can do in the climate change debate as an individual to make a really big difference in the world, irregardless of whether you believe in climate change or not, doesn't matter what your belief is, all of these things that I'm going to talk about are going to benefit all sorts of other things that we know to be true. So we don't even need to get into the climate change debate. It ostensibly nullifies it. And if you're just watching this video and you haven't watched part one, make sure you do that, because it'll explain my point of view on all of that and why you can kind of just move on from that whole polarizing debate. So step number one in changing your footprint from one that's negative to positive, and not even just going to neutral. I mean, this is the conversation that a lot of the conventional media is talking about right now, is that at best humans can be neutral. And what I'm arguing is that humans can be just as positive as they are negative. And I'm going to talk about the 10 things that you can do to actually be just as positive as you are negative. So step number one is buying food from regenerative farms. Farms that produce topsoil, that are storing water in the ground, that are putting carbon back into the earth in the form of soil carbon, that are growing healthy and happy animals, that are creating space for pollinators and other insects, and that are not looking at nature as the next enemy, that are creating partnerships with Mother Nature, recognizing that she has an important role to play in the production of food and all the other products that we have, and that when we work with her, 1 + 1 = 3. Nature always bats last, and so the farmers that are running regenerative enterprises, regenerative farms, not only are producing the most nutrient-dense food out there, but they're also creating space for ecology. One of the biggest mistakes that we've made as a species in the last 12,000 years is this view that it's us against nature. And there's plenty of books written on this myth that exists with our species. One of the most famous ones is Moby Dick. Moby Dick is the metaphorical story of man versus nature. And it plays out in almost everything that we do, how we harvest forests, how we grow food. And so you can change this myth, you can change this relationship, and you can do it 3 times a day. And here in Alberta, there's plenty of farmers that are, I call the next wave of farming, that are doing things that are absolutely incredible, and they're experimenting with new ways of growing food and of partnering with Mother Nature to grow the best food that's available on the planet, right here in our province. That's happening right across Canada and right across the US. And what I found is that urbanites struggle to find these farmers for lots of reasons. Farmers usually farm because they enjoy the peace and quiet. And marketing is a dirty word for them, or a word that they don't like to think about because it means that they actually have to leave their farm. But in order for these people to survive, they need individuals like us to put our money where our mouth is. And so a lot of times you hear people talking about how they're going vegetarian or vegan in order to save the planet. And that can be a good strategy if you live in the tropics or the subtropics. But if you live in the northern hemisphere, the act of eating beef or chicken or pork that comes from a farm that's practicing regenerative agriculture can have a profoundly positive impact. I'll put a link in the show notes below from a farmer named Gabe Brown, who, when he bought his farm in the 90s, had a soil carbon level in Iowa, I believe, North Dakota, of 1%. He's now regenerated his soils to have a soil carbon of well over 12% in some of his fields, which is absolutely incredible. For the longest time, soil scientists thought that it took 1,000 years to grow an inch of topsoil, and now guys like Gabe Brown, using great innovative grazing methods, cover crop systems, and really just understanding some basic principles on how nature works, he's actually able to feed people within his community and build the fertility of his farm without buying conventional fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides in ways nobody ever thought was possible. And so even if you don't want to be Gabe Brown, you can just support the Gabe Browns of the world. And I'll put a list of farms below that I support, or that I support either with my dollars or I promote them on places like this. And you can buy your food from these places and have an incredible positive impact on the planet. Lastly, I want to say that there's a lot of rhetoric about how bad eating meat is for the planet. And this is just not true, and it's definitely not based in any kind of science. At least, I should say that it's only partially true. There are some partial truths to it, but mostly it's not true. The statement is that all meat is bad and causes climate change and all of these things. But really, the meat that you should be avoiding is any animal that's being raised in a confined animal feeding operation. So this is pigs that never see the light of day because they're raised in factories. This is cows that are fattened in feedlots and fed grain, which they should never be fed because cows shouldn't eat grain. It's not good for them, at least not large quantities of it. This is chickens that are grown in factories in the tens of thousands in absolutely abhorrent conditions. This is why you can buy a broiler for $6 at your local grocery store. These animals are definitely creating dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico. They're releasing massive amounts of methane, and they're in complete and utter misery. And so, even if you believe that animals are sentient or they're not, no living organism should be put through that kind of hell. And it turns out that when our animals are happy and they're raised with care and fed in the right way, and they are grown in a way that partners with nature as opposed to always working against her, we end up with products that are super nutrient dense for ourselves. So a bunch of farmers in Alberta paid to have some services done where they looked at the omega-3 to 6 ratio of their meat products. And it turned out that a lot of these farms that participated had better omega-3 to 6 ratios than most seafood, which is unbelievable because everybody up till now has thought that you need to eat seafood in order to get an omega-3 to 6 ratio that's anti-inflammatory. If you don't know much about omega-3 to 6 ratios, I encourage you to check it out. Just search it on YouTube or Google. Generally, you want an omega-3 to 6 ratio of 1 to 1 or 2 to 1. It's not that omega-3 or omega-6 is bad, it's actually the ratio between the two that counts. And it turns out that when animals are pastured and they're fed a biodiverse diet, fed food that they're meant to be fed, without being laden with fungicides and herbicides, that they end up having those characteristics which end up being really good for you. So I'll let you do your own research on omega-3 to 6. I'll put a bunch of links to the farms that I support here in Alberta. And if you find this stuff interesting and you want to learn more about permaculture and what you can do as an individual, we have a free course that you can subscribe to that will give you an introduction to the concept of permaculture. And I'll put that in the show notes as well below. It's available for free. So take a look at it and make sure you leave some comments there and tell me what you think. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button down below. It really helps the channel to get out there into the world so that I can spread more positive information about things like this. If you're not subscribed and you want information about when these videos come out, make sure you subscribe. And if you want a little bit of positivity in your inbox once a week, head over to vergepermaculture.ca and sign up for my newsletter. I write a weekly-ish newsletter that talks about these sorts of things in a super positive way. Thanks so much. Have a great day. See you on the next video.